Hello and welcome everyone. Glad to be back here on YouTube live. Like last time, we will be covering quite a lot of things, but the focus for today is editorial design tips and tricks. So we mainly will be using InDesign, Adobe InDesign. As you can see, I already have that application open, and I will be using several examples, so I will be jumping back and forth, and we will also be using Photoshop and Illustrator occasionally. But most of the things that we will cover are going to be focusing on how to make the body copy look good, because that's whenever we work with editorial layouts and compositions, most of the content that we have that we need to work with is the body copy. Like in this example as well, you can see I have a magazine spread. Majority of it is the body copy. So I'm just going to bring up my brush and then I can show exactly what I'm talking about. Let's just bring up our brush. So what I'm talking about is all of this. So I can now select it. Yeah, so this would all be considered body copy, obviously, apart from the image that we have in this selection. And the reason why it's hard to make body copy interesting is because, first of all, you have quite a lot of text that you have to fit on the page, whether it's a brochure or a magazine or a book. But most importantly, you need to make it look good while keeping readability your focus. And there is a difference between readability and legibility, and this is also something we will be discussing throughout this live stream. So we will be talking about theory as well, but also doing a couple of actual techniques that we go through. And if we have time for everything that I planned here, then we will also be covering a bit more advanced typographic features in InDesign, like how to use grep and fix a couple of common problems with copy, but again, the body copy that we have. But yeah, just generally, how can we make the body copy sexier? That was my main title that I made for myself in my notes. This is actually something that maybe not with the exact same wording, but a lot of times people ask me how to do, and we discuss this quite often, me and my students. We have an amazing program, the Pro membership, where we mentor students from around the world. We have a few hundred students currently in this program, and it's always an amazing thing to discuss things with them. We have actually a community as well. Whoever is following us on YouTube can join this community for free. Just go on our website and you will find the way to sign up to our newsletter, and through that you will be able to join the community. So yeah, I highly recommend to do that, because then through the community you will be able to access also additional content, and even some of our videos that we release on YouTube, we actually give access earlier to our community members. All right, now let's get started. I wanted to first show you something that I find really engaging and fun to work on always, whenever I do magazine spreads especially, but it can be applied in any editorial project. It's the drop caps. So if I just jump back here in this document, let's just start with this page. Some of you might be familiar with this example already, but I find it a great example of how we can make a drop cap look more exciting and engaging. And a drop cap essentially is an entry point that you can use to attract viewers' attention and direct their attention to a specific part of your spread. and most of the times the entry point is used in the first paragraph of a body copy, or a story, we also call it in InDesign. So that's within an article, after the intro paragraph, or obviously after the title or heading. The first thing that you will get within the body copy would be a drop cap. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be there, but when it is used, one of the things that I find useful to set up, like you see it here already, is to keep the first word set to all capitals. So if I just retype this like this, the problem using a drop cap like that is that there is too big of a contrast between the drop cap itself and the rest of the word within the copy. So to avoid this problem, I like to keep my text like the way that I've set it up. So once again, let me just jump back here. That's just a very simple technique, and you can actually even set the rest of the text to bold, just to even connect the drop cap itself and that text closer to each other. Another mistake that I often find people fall into or do is that they don't give enough space between the drop cap and the text, and that's just simply a matter of kerning. So using Alt or Option left and right arrows, you can very quickly adjust the space between the drop cap itself and the rest of the text. So that's Alt or Option left and right arrows. That's the way you adjust it. You just put your cursor in between the first and the second letters of the paragraph. Now, where can you find the setting for drop caps? It's a fairly simple place. You just have to make sure that you double click inside your first paragraph, and then within the paragraph formatting controls, which you can find here on the top, you will find this right here. This is the drop cap number of lines. Right now I set it to really high. That's why my drop cap is so big. And the next option is the amount of characters that are turned into drop cap. Again, that can be increased. As you can see, I can have multiple characters, but I normally like to keep it 1. But I'm just going to show you, if I reduce the amount of lines, then this is how it's going to adjust itself. I like to have quite a big drop cap, especially when I have space. So in this case, I have the luxury to have space within this spread. You can see we have a lot of negative space here, so there's lots of space that we can work with. Now, one of the things that I like to do is that instead of just relying on a typeface for my drop cap, is to actually use an image for my drop cap, and that's something that you can create in Illustrator or Photoshop, or even using AI. I actually created a few of my drop caps recently using generative AI tools like Midjourney. I'm going to show an example of that. But first of all, I want to show you this simple example. It's a very quick little technique. This was an example that we used in our 365 Days of Creativity series. Okay, and I'm still running the, it still starts in the beta version of Photoshop. So I'm just going to drop it into the other actual main release of Photoshop. There we are. We won't need actions for this. We won't need channels either. So here we have the letter N, and we have the image with these leaves. And what I'm going to do is to clip the image on the text. So the text layer just simply has that N inside it, capital N, and I'm going to Alt or Option click between the two layers, make sure that the image is on top of the text layer, and then you can create this clipping mask. The other shortcut is Command or Control Alt G. That's also a quick way of creating the clipping mask. And once you created that, I mean, this already looks interesting, that we could use in InDesign, but I like to go a little bit further than that most of the time. So I would create an additional layer. I just duplicated that layer with the leaves by pressing Command or Control J, and then holding down the Alt or Option key, I'm going to click on the layer mask icon. which is going to completely hide this layer. So creates a black, a mask, layer mask filled with black. Once we have that, what we can do is now reveal some of these leaves coming out of the frame. And for this, I'm just going to use my brush tool. So let me just choose a default brush. And we can have a hard brush selected for this. Set it to 100%. And then we just draw out. Of course, you could be clever with the selection techniques that you use for this. But for now, I'm just going to be doing this in a very quick and dirty way. So I'm going to make the selection there like that. And then let's just get another leaf out here. So I am drawing in the layer mask with white. So I'm using a white brush. And first I'm just revealing the leaves that I want to see. I think these two are quite nice. And then I just go back with, now I'm drawing with black. I'm just hiding the details that I don't need. And by the way, at this point, we can always go into the smarter selection tools, like the object selection tool. If I make a selection here, it should be able to detect the leaves for us. And it actually did quite a good job selecting that detail. But we have to make sure that we are on the image when we are using this tool. So let me just make another selection here. Yeah, there we go. We have our selection. Now we can jump back into the layer mask. And then we just have to make sure we invert this selection. That's Command or Control Shift I. And then paint around the edges there with the black foreground color that we had before as well. So there you go. That's already a much faster way of selecting the leaves. And just, I mean, it's really up to the amount of time that you have. You can continue doing this to make it more interesting and add more leaves coming out of the character and making the drop cap a bit more interesting. However, what I want to do here is also just to add a little bit more depth. So the way we can do that is by double clicking on the layer, the text layer at the bottom, and applying inner shadow on it. So there's an inner shadow. I'm going to increase the size and probably also increase the opacity just so we can see better what's happening. The choke I'm going to increase as well now, just so you can really see what I'm doing. So if I turn this layer or effect off and on, there's the shadow. And what I want to make sure is that it's a little bit more subtle than that, but still make it feel like there is some depth in this composition. Once I click OK, we can see how that looks. And the only problem when you apply this effect is that those details that are coming outside of the frame or out of bounds effects, these leaves, they are going to mix with the details that are now covered by this inner shadow effect. As you can see, there is the effect. If I turn it off, it's a seamless flow between the extracted details and the details inside the letter. But when I have that effect on, then obviously there's a clear connection between the two. So there's a couple of quick ways to fix this. I can go back into my layer mask using white brush again, a brush with white, and just paint over those leaves, and be careful not to draw over the other leaves. So this again just helps to make it really feel like it's coming out, because it's not affected by that inner shadow underneath. And the same thing here with these two leaves. I want to make sure that these two leaves are not affected by this. This is probably the smartest way of doing it, because the advantage of this is that even if I go back and make amends to my layer style, this mask is still going to work. So if I just go back, I show you, go back into inner shadow and adjust maybe the size. You can see I can adjust the size. As long as I don't go too far, it's not going to affect the result. So again, it's just about the time you have to refine your mask, make it work the way you wanted it, and then you can have these cool effects there. I think that's probably enough for now. And one thing you shouldn't forget whenever you create something that you will end up using in InDesign is to turn off your background layer. You can even completely delete it if you want. And I'm going to also crop this image without deleting the crop pixels. And I always like to keep a non-destructive crop. So I'm going to do something like that. I will clear the ratio. I don't need the original ratio. So I like to keep a tighter crop on my composition. And then I will save this as a new file. I'm just going to put this demo here. And then we can jump back into InDesign. And I'm going to drop this image right here. So place it on this composition. Okay. And then we just have to make sure it's filled in there. Okay, that looks good. Now, how do we use this in our composition? First of all, I'm going to crop it even closer. I'm holding down the Alt or Option key to get the frame even closer. That is looking already better. First of all, we need to replace this character within the text. And the cool thing that not a lot of people know, you can actually place an image inside the text frame. And then the image will become an inline object, it's called, or nested object. That's another way that it, or actually, sorry, anchored object, it can be referred to as. So all I have to do is to cut this image out so that image frame is ready the way I wanted to use this. I cut it out, Command or Control X. Then I highlight my first letter, which is the drop cap, and then paste this image in. Command or Control V, and there you go. We already have it working as a drop cap. And the best thing about this is this. Look at this. If I select my paragraph, I just double click in the paragraph, I can now go back to the settings and I can increase and decrease the amount of lines I want to have affected. Of course, there's one thing that won't adjust in this case, and that's the size of the drop cap, because it's a static image and the image size is not going to be affected. But I can still adjust how deep I want the drop cap to go within the text. And just like before, even though it's an image, I can still use the kerning technique. Remember, clicking in the text, Alt, left and right arrows, I can still use that, even though it's an image. And of course, I can also play around with the positioning or refine the positioning of the text, the image within the text frame. That's called vertical positioning of the anchored object. It's something that by default is allowed, but it's actually something that you can restrict if you want to. This is something you can do from the object menu, anchored object, options. This is the option called prevent manual positioning. If you don't want that to be moving around freely like that, you can turn it off. Most of the time I like to keep it on because it helps me to align it. In this case, I want to make sure that the top of this letter N is aligned to the rest of the text. So that way it looks much more professional. All right. So hopefully that helps some of you who are watching, and hopefully you will find this a useful technique. So once again, all you have to do is find a good image that works with the copy or the article that you're working on, and then really make the drop cap or turn the drop cap into a feature, a real powerful entry point that will really engage the viewers and really like draw them into the article. Because of course in this spread, when we look at this, the main image is very captivating. These models on the right, it already would stop you going through the magazine most likely. But then on the left side, the Call of the Wild is the actual heading or title of this article. I didn't want to put too much emphasis on that because it's quite big and it's very noticeable. But this drop cap actually became the second strongest focal point within the spread. And that was my intention. That's what I wanted to achieve. Of course, I would refine things here further. I would increase the size of the heading. I would also make sure that this these two elements are centered, because at the moment they were not centered. And yeah, I mean, even the text here at the bottom could be centered. But for now, I'm just going to keep things like that. And I'm going to jump over to the next example. Any questions so far from anyone who's watching, please let me know in the chat. And hi to everyone joining. I can see Robert and Lou and a couple of other names here. Golem Master. I'm glad it's inspiring. Doctor Who Design. I'm really happy that you decided to join. So let's go to the next example. Again, this is something that might be familiar to some of you who've been following us for a while on YouTube. I like to use this example again to demonstrate the power of drop caps and creating engaging entry points. So here's a spread that looks already quite interesting, and there's a lot of things going on here. We have an out of bounds effect created here with the horns coming out of the frame. That's, by the way, a very simple technique that you can achieve by creating a masked version of an image. So in this case, I have this horned image. I'm just going to show the original image if we select the edge of that. Okay. I'm not sure why it's not. There you go. So that's the full image. But then there is a version which is masked out, which just has the horns selected or masked out in Photoshop, and then it's simply placing these two on top of each other that creates that effect. You can even recreate this effect with a single Photoshop file, of course, but yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on that. We could go into image effects a lot. I want to focus on the body copy stylization, or making body copy more interesting. So here on the left side we have another drop cap, this V for Vikings, and we have this cool image from the TV show, Netflix TV show Vikings. I think this character was called Porun. She was a really badass shield maiden, and I decided to use her image. She just has a very stoic, heroic stance, and I think it would work really well with this drop cap. So what I decided to do, I have this file again. I'm going to open it up in Photoshop. What I decided to do is to let's just open this one up here. I will close this one, and then let's open the file. There we go. Okay, so what I decided to do here is to have the shape of the letter V in a very simple font or typeface. In this case, it's Futura. Not simple is probably not the good word for it, but something that has like a very solid shape that doesn't have much decoration on it. So most of the time I like to work with sans serif fonts like Futura, and what I like about this font is it has the same line length, so it's a very symmetrical, powerful shape. It's like a triangle essentially. It's going to work really well for the image that we have here, and then I just plonk the image on top of it. Now, if we were to do the same technique as we've done in the previous example, and I crop or clip this image onto the character, that doesn't really work in this case, of course, because we will lose most of the interesting details. So instead here I'm going to do something different. I am going to first select the image and choose Select Subject. That's a quick way using a selection, or creating a selection of the person, and then turn that into a mask. Now there's a couple of details that could be refined here. Although the fur is looking quite good, the hair might need a little bit of refinement. But for demonstration purposes, I think this is going to work just fine. And then the next thing I would like to do is to actually mask out a little bit more the details from this. But I like to keep my original mask the way it is. And for this technique, I am going to use an additional mask. Now, what happens if you added a second mask on a layer? So if I put another mask on the layer which already has a layer mask, that's actually going to be a vector mask. Now, when you are using a vector mask, you would probably want to work with the pen tool and set the option to path. And also in this case, because we want to extract further details from it, I would use the subtract front shape option. So once that's also selected from here in the options bar, we can zoom a little bit closer. And essentially what I want to do is to have the hand selected here. So if I start drawing, I'm just going a little bit closer here so we can see what's going to happen. I am going to draw over the details here. And I'll just do a little bit more crude selection because I don't want to waste too much time. But what you will see is as soon as I get to this part here, we don't even need this last point. As soon as I get to this point here, it's actually enough for us. I can go a bit higher like that. I need to follow the shape of that letter, and then later we can refine this. So what I wanted to achieve here is to make it look like her arm is coming in front of the shape, in front of the text, while the rest of the details will go behind it. So we don't actually need to go this far into the shape, so we can bring this down and follow the shape of the letter, like so. And you will see immediately what I wanted to create here. So this is going to help us create that integrated look between the character and the text behind it. Now, if you are using the vector mask, it's going to give you more control to refine the mask, but it takes longer to make these selections. So if you want to do the rest of the changes, you can actually use the layer mask. I'm just going to jump back in the layer mask and I'll show you another quick technique. So if I paint here with the brush, you can see I end up going over details that I don't want to delete. So before I start making my selections, I can Command or Control click on the text layer underneath, and that way I can just very quickly mask out those details that I want to remove from there. So this way I can go over most of the details here and just avoid the arm. Again, I just want the arm, make it look like the arm comes out in front of the text layer, like so. And then once I'm ready, I can maybe also go over this detail here, the fur. I really just want her arm to come out of that shape, the letter V, like that. And then I can remove my selection, and then I can quickly hide these details as well. And the details on the left side I will quickly draw over as well. So just because I'm demonstrating this live, I won't spend time doing this with the pen tool, but normally if I were to do this for an actual client, I would prefer to use the pen tool for all of these edges, because that way I can really go back and refine it later if I want to. But for now, I'm just going to draw back some details there, and I think we've done a good job. It looks quite good. So it feels like she's standing within that letter. Here, of course, we still have a little bit more detail to remove. That black background is not needed. A bit smaller brush. In case using the brush tool, it's of course better to use a stylus. I just don't have my stylus at hand, so I'm using the mouse, but it would have been faster to use the pen tablet. But now that's good. We can just add an additional layer here, an empty layer on top of the text layer, clip it onto the text layer, and then use the brush tool pick a color from the text itself, that red color. Just change the blend mode of this layer to multiply. Use a soft edge brush, so I'm reducing the softness of my brush, and just paint over the areas where the hand comes on top of the text. So a little bit here as well on the right. So it's essentially like a drop shadow. Make it feel like it really comes in front of it, like that. Okay, and I can see I left a little bit of gap in there. Just going back to my vector mask to fix that. I'm going to use the direct selection tool and align the edge to make sure we don't have any gap there. Okay, that looks much better. We can turn off our background layer. We can save this composition as a new one. I'm going to call it demo. Close it. And then we will replace this image. So I'm going to drop in the image from here. I saw one of you mentioning that Adobe Bridge no one's using anymore. I don't use it often, but I still find it useful for demonstration. I can have a couple of examples put together even if they are not in the same folder. I can keep an eye on them better in one place. So let's just drop this one here. Can delete the other image, and then let's make this a little bit bigger. And then of course we can delete the first letter of the text, and I will also remove the drop cap from this paragraph, so we don't actually need the drop cap anymore. There it is. So we just set that down like that. And like I've done in the previous example, I'm going to turn this first word into all capitals. That's Command or Control Shift K, and also bold Command or Control Shift B. So that's just makes things a little bit more connected. We could even have the same color on it. That's again just helps to connect it to the text. So if I have the color picker, that's I, and click on the image, we should be able to save that as a swatch. I think it might be a setting that I need to change. For some reason it's not picking up that color from our image, but I'm going to just going to eyeball it now. I'm not going to worry about making it exactly the same. So I will use the color, create a new swatch, and just change it. Yeah, we are working in CMYK. So let's set that up quickly. A bit darker than that. Yeah, something like this. All right. That's looking good. And then we just zoom out a bit. We can move this text up, move this one a little bit closer. And what I also want is to have a drop cap applied to this. Sorry, not drop cap. A text frame applied to this. A text wrap, which is Command Option W or Window Text Wrap. And just simply choose the third option, which is the wrap around object shapes. And then you have to make sure that this is set to alpha channel. So the contour type is following the alpha channel. And then we can increase the offset a little bit, just to have a little bit more space between the drop cap, our graphic drop cap, and the text. So if we zoom out, now we have a very strong left page in this spread. Very powerful, really makes the whole thing come together. So we can of course increase the size of this. We can move it down. Again, I like to have alignments in my document, so I sometimes in these cases I would even use a ruler just to make sure that things are perfectly aligned, and then I align the top of that letter there. And I'm just going to turn off my guides just so we can have a better look at the text. And yeah, I think that looks quite nice. Of Of course, because it's a Photoshop file, we can always go back and make adjustments to it later if we wanted to. Maybe the only negative thing here is that there is only a very small detail showing up here on the left side of the top part of the V. In these cases, I would recommend to either go extreme and increase the size even further, so you have a very strong crop like that, or show a little bit more of those details there. So in between, that's almost like a mistake. It feels like it wasn't intentional. So you want to go beyond or below the effect. So yeah, you have to look out for these things. It's not really a tangent, but similar to a tangent that you would have in a composition where things are aligned in a way that is not clear whether they're supposed to be in front or behind. In this case, it was just a little bit of weak positioning earlier on. Now I feel like it's much better. It works better. Okay, hopefully again that makes sense. And this is all I wanted to show for this particular example. But I just wanted to show you one more example of a style or a technique that can be used to create drop caps. And again, I'm still having issue with which version of Photoshop is opening the files for me. So I'm just going to drag and drop it in here. So there is a composition that I created with a combination of a couple of techniques, but most of it I used in most of the detail that you see here was created in Midjourney. Each of the letters that you can see here for this composition, I'll make it a little bit bigger, you can see it. Each individually I created in Midjourney and then brought them into Photoshop, and then there with generative fill and some manual retouching techniques, I refined them, made them look more connected to each other. Because that's one thing in Midjourney, that when you're experimenting with prompts, even though I kept very similar prompts, the style of these letters had quite a lot of variety in them. And besides wanting to keep it similar in style, I wanted to also have this overarching theme of nature, going from winter to spring, then summer, and then to autumn. So you can probably see that transition here. And the reason I'm showing this example is that there is a very powerful combination there to create these cool and exciting drop caps. So yeah, I mean, both Adobe Firefly and Midjourney can create really cool characters with a lot of detail and yeah, interest in general that you can then use in your editorial work. So I just wanted to point that out, because of course the previous example with the text, I mean that letter and the leaves coming out of it is already cool, but you can always take these to the next level if you are creative in how you use these new AI features as well in out there. Oh, okay, we have Alan from Hungary, Sia. And I can see we have some more people joining as well. Tahir, Ben, and Ben is saying, yeah, about Bridge. Font management, I actually don't really use Bridge for that. I don't know if they meant to turn it into a font management tool, but yeah, for those who don't understand Sia, it's saying hi in Hungarian. I am from Hungary originally, so whoever is here from Hungary, I meant that for them. So let me move on to the next example. I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat as well at the same time. So what I wanted to show for another useful technique to make your body copy interesting and make it engaging for people to read it. So once again, entry point, like the drop cap, is something that draws people in, because a large amount of text is hardly appealing. Most people, especially nowadays, our fast-paced world, everything is happening so quickly. We don't really like to digest information that's just too long. So the body copy, which is always the longest amount of or largest amount of text, needs to be created in a way that's still engaging and interesting. So what I wanted to show here is that if you have a pull quote like this one, instead of just placing it somewhere in the negative space in your spread, you can be a little bit more playful with it. So for instance, in this case, what we can do is to turn this into a text wrap. So we can use the same panel that we used before, but in this case, we will just use the wrap around bounding box, and again, increase the offset around it. So we want to have at least 3 millimeters offset. I think that's going to be enough, like that. And then we can adjust this text frame to make it fit a little bit better to this composition. So let's see if we do it like that. Yeah, that looks quite interesting. And I go back to my text wrap, and I am actually going to turn off the chain and increase the right offset a little bit more. I think it's important to keep more space there between the text and the pull quote. And of course, the pull quote should be placed in a way that it doesn't disrupt the flow of the body copy. So I wouldn't want the first line of the body copy to be above it like this, especially because there is an indent on the first line of each of these paragraphs. So I would probably have it placed somewhere there, aligning with one of the paragraphs, or maybe up here. And that looks quite good as well. So this is already interesting, but we can again take this to the next level. So one important thing here, interaction between the elements of your design should always be something that's on your mind when you're designing layouts. And interaction means any element that feels like connected or in some way overlapping or just interacting with each other will make your composition much more structured and exciting. And it's also a good way of directing people's attention through the spread. So instead, once again, like we had it here before, just having that pull quote sitting on the top of the page felt more like a heading or subheading instead of a pull quote. Now it feels much more connected, integrated into the rest of the composition. So I think that's a win for us in there. And then I want to just jump into another tool, or show you quickly another tool that we can use here. And this is the pen tool, which is not something you often use in InDesign. But for this particular technique, I like to use it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hold down the Shift key and draw a straight line. Then I'm going to draw another line there, another line here, Shift key again, Shift key up, maybe Shift key a little bit higher there, and then just go to the right. Yeah, something like that. Of course, it's always easier to draw while having already the color applied. I'm going to use a black stroke with 100% tint, and I'm going to increase the thickness of this. So there you go. That's already creating a little bit more interesting result. And one quick way of making sure that these anchor points here that I created are all aligned is to use the direct selection tool. And then let me just make a selection of them again. So select them all, shift click on these anchor points that we created, and then you can use the alignment option. Align to top edges or align to bottom edges should make sure that they are all aligned to each other. That I actually aligned them already correctly in the beginning. And now I can just refine these shapes a little bit more. If I wanted to select that anchor point, align it to the text, so it ends exactly where the text ends, and maybe even this one here, I can align it so it ends exactly where that E ends. Let's just see with our ruler, we can align it better. There, let's just drag it back a bit. I'm quite particular about these things, so I like to keep them perfectly aligned. And in this case as well, I would use a ruler. Get a little bit closer. Place that in there. That's actually already perfect. Okay, cool. Now let's take a look at it from a distance. So hopefully that makes sense, and you can see what I meant about integration. And yes, there's a good point from Cyprian, make the pull quote bigger. That would actually work perfectly here because there's a quite big empty space here. So normally what I like to do is actually in these cases, if I want to make it really big, is to put it in a separate text frame. It's just much easier to work with it like that. So if I place in the pull quote itself or quotation mark, and then I want to increase the size of it, I can now use the not sure why it's not resizing it. Normally with the there it is. For some reason it jumps back to the original size. There must be something preventing it, probably a style or the text. Is there a text wrap? Oh yes, the text wrap, of course. This is actually a very good example for a feature. So remember, for the pull quote we used text wrap, and now because I have another text frame, this pull quote text frame is pushing any text away from itself, and as soon as I move my gigantic pull quote closer, it keeps disappearing. And the reason for that is because it gets affected by the text wrap here. So to protect it from the text wrap, I'm going to press Command or Control B, and in the text frame options, I will turn on Ignore Text Wrap. So this will be completely independent. It's not going to be affected by any text wrap used in this document. And then I can place my pull quote nicely there. And I can still make it smaller or bigger. I can align it the way I wanted it. If Cyprian wants it to be very big, we could even create something crazy that overlaps that line that we created there. We could even have, I don't know, an outline around it. We can even have this on top of that text. But I think already something like this makes it quite interesting. And of course, we should have a pull quote at the end as well. Sorry, not pull quote, a quotation mark at the end of the text. But you can get away with it when you are doing more of a graphic look like this. This already works. And another good point from Cyprian, change the color. Use the color from the image. That's a very good point. We can use it for the pull quote, quotation mark. Let me change the, create a new color. Let's go back in here. For some reason, my color picker doesn't work. But I'm just going to, again, eyeball it. It has a bit more green in it as well, like that. Maybe a bit darker. Yeah, that's closer to the color of the water in the image. And then, of course, we can also use the same color for this outline. I wanted to keep it fairly dark so it matches. And yeah, I think that's a very good idea, Cyprian, and that looks good. I probably wouldn't change the text color, but that's also something that we can consider at this point. I just noticed that we have one additional word that's right now it's missing. So I'm going to probably make the text a bit smaller, or we can adjust our frame. I thought we already adjusted this earlier to fit, but it seems like I forgot to check that. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to waste more time on this. We will just ignore that missing word for now. I would most likely adjust this text here a bit so it fits in this frame, or adjust the frame around it. There is a question. Roska is saying, your biggest problem is always that clients give way too much text and few pages. Yes, that is the common problem. So the example I'm using here is a very generous magazine layout where we have a lot of negative space, and we can easily work around the body copy. We can add a lot of interest because we have that luxury of real estate space in the magazine spreads. But yeah, very often you would be restricted to having a lot of copy in less pages. And that's always going to lead to a more cramped, claustrophobic feel where you have just too much content on the page. That's hard to work with for sure. And there are a couple of ways that you can make your text still readable. So readability is slightly different from legibility. Legibility, we usually mean when something, whether it actually be legible or not. So physically, can you read it or not? So for instance, here, if I were to make this text on the left side, go a little bit higher, right? Now, what is suffering is the legibility of this text because it's just too bright, the background. And the text is the first word or first two words are just not visible enough. So legibility is suffering. Readability is something more that affects most of the time the body copy, which is more about whether someone finds reading your text comfortable or not. Is it something that they want to read or not? So the way you can improve readability, there's a couple of ways of doing it. And this is very important, especially when you have a lot of text on a page. So concentrating on improving readability, that's our next topic. First of all, choosing the right typeface is crucial. So what you use in your body copy is very important. And you shouldn't stick to fonts that are popular or other people use, or I don't know, just simply like fancy fonts. Instead, you should pay attention to the actual characters in the font. And first and most importantly, you want to pick a font or typeface or font family that's very versatile, so has lots of different styles. And I recommend normally for body copy to work with super font families, which include both sans serif and serif variations. So that's going to help you already a lot, because these special font families would have the X height and the set width of your characters matching. So even if they are two different, like serif and sans serif combined, they would still work really well together thanks to the way they were built. So one example, and we can already start playing with this here. So if I go a little bit closer here, currently this text is set in Lato or Lato. That's a font that I think it's definitely something you can find in the Adobe fonts library. But there is one that's quite a good font to work with. Let me just find it. It's called Tisa. Tisa Pro comes in many different variations, as you can see. It's not a font that I would use for everything, but it certainly has an advantage for body copy. So you can see we have the sans version, sans serif, and then we have the serif, but it's actually a slab serif, so slightly different than like a traditional serif would look like. But if I just select all of the text in here and we choose Tisa, And then Tisza is, by the way, one of big rivers in Hungary, but it's not named after that, and it's not spelled like this, but it's just a funny name. So if I go into maybe light, you can see how that looks. And if we zoom even closer, one of the things that I like to look at when I choose my font for my body copy is how open the apertures or counters are on the characters. So what I mean is all of these open spaces, like this one here, this one there. We also have obviously the counter in the C, even like these spaces within the U. There's lots of different terms depending on which character we are aiming at. But yeah, these open spaces, if they are too closed together, then it's going to affect readability. So right now we have the Tisza font is this, and then the other one was the Lato. They both are quite good in that sense. There's plenty of space, so it gives enough control between the characters, so it's easy to read them. While other fonts, like even a famous font like Helvetica, if I choose that, let's just go into Helvetica, Neue, maybe light. You can probably already notice what I meant. Look at this space here. Why is my screen brush not working? Yeah, so yeah, this space here and that space here, very closed. So for small text, these very tightly closed gaps are much harder to read, especially on long, like a lot of text put together. So I would definitely avoid using fonts like Helvetica for body copy. You can see the difference when I switch back and forth here. If you concentrate on these open spaces, you can see even the C looks much better on this other font that we chose. So yeah, choosing a font that offers more versatility and better readability is crucial in the beginning. And then you also want to have ligatures included. Ligatures always help. Make sure that there are ligatures in the font included. And then let me just see if there's any other questions in the meantime. No, for now. Okay, so another thing that you can do to improve your body copy is to first of all think about the measure. The measure is the amount of characters within a line. Now, within this composition here, we have two columns. They are actually not connected to each other. So I'm just going to move this column a little bit further out, spreading it out a bit or moving it back. You can see, because we are using justification, what happens when I make my column narrower is that the text is getting worse, creating rivers. Obviously it gets even worse when I go even tighter. These big gaps start to appear within it. It gets even worse if we turn off hyphenation. Currently hyphenation is still turned on, but if that's turned off, then obviously it gets really bad. So the rivers within the text will appear. However, what you can also do is there is a preference in InDesign under composition. If you go preferences, composition, there is this option called H and J violations. This is actually, it means hyphenation and justification violations. So if you turn that on and you go into your normal view, so not in the preview mode, then it will automatically highlight all those lines that are affected by bad justification and hyphenation. But essentially this is mainly caused by the justification. So if I turn this text to left aligned, immediately the issues are gone, because all of the spacing between the characters and words are now equal. So there is no justified text. But as soon as I turn on justification, we start to have these issues showing up here. And the stronger the highlight, the bigger the problem is. And of course, we will see the stronger, thicker highlights on the narrower measured parts. So here in the middle, this is where the measure is very narrow because of the text wrap that we used on the left side. So this is a great way of identifying where we have these problems. And if you need to use justification, which by the way is a great way of keeping your text neat and avoid ragged edges on the side or rags, which obviously appears if you use left align or right align. So this is something which would be referred to as the rag. And if it gets very uneven, that's not nice, not pleasing to the eye. So that's one of the main reasons someone would use justification. So when you have justification, what can you do? First of all, you can turn off the hyphenate option, and that already improves it. Look at the highlights, how they are starting to disappear. So it's still not completely gone, but it already helped. But when you are using justification and hyphens at the same time, you want to also use Roman hanging punctuation or vertical alignment. This is from the window menu, type and tables story. It's a really hidden option. Optical margin alignment is what they call it. So when you turn that on, you can see how the hyphens move outside of the frame, so they don't interrupt the line of the justified text. So the text feels more connected or aligned. All the characters feel like they are aligned to each other, and the hyphens are actually slightly outside of the frame. You can refine this setting if you want, but most of the time the default setting is good. And we can once again see that having that setting, it doesn't really get rid of the issue. If not, it might make the issue noticeable in some cases even more, but it's certainly helping readability. So the comfort of reading this text is improving. Now, what we can also do is to go into settings for both justification and hyphenation. So we can go into having this text frame selected. We can go into the additional options here on the right, but we have to make sure we have the type tool selected. By the way, I'm sure you can find this somewhere else as well. I always go here to the right side, additional options, and choose justification. There's actually even a keyboard shortcut for it there. You can save this into a paragraph style, or I think only paragraph style, yeah, not character style, and then you don't have to worry about it again. But essentially, what you want to change here is to refine the settings. I like to use the following. So minimum word spacing I like to set to 85, and I'm going to use the preview already so we can see in the background how things are changing. The desired I like to set to 85%. The maximum to 110%, and then letter spacing -2, 0, and 4, and glyph scaling 98, 100, and 102. So I think that's looking already a little bit better. So we can click OK once again, before and after. Slightly improved what we see there. But we can go then back into that same settings, and in this time I'm going to use the hyphenation. And for this again, we can adjust a couple of things, like hyphenate after 3, before 3 as well, hyphen limit set to 2, and hyphenation zone we can reduce a bit, and also better spacing is what I want, and I don't want to hyphenate the last word, and also across columns. So once again, we can turn that on, and we can see that has actually caused a little bit more problems again for us. But what we can do in general is what's something that's going to very radically improve the result is to reduce the text size. So if I reduce the text size, it's going to improve. And of course, I'm going to also just move this text wrap or pull quote a bit further out. So I'm going to group it together and then move it to the left, so it's not as squashed, the text. It doesn't have to go in that far into the text to create the desired effect. You don't want to make the measure too small. In certain cases, in small sections, it's okay to make it less than 40 characters, but generally you want to aim for at least 40 characters in a line. And the way you can test that is by selecting the line and then going into the info panel, window info panel. And like here, I can see it's 48 characters in this section, while in this section here it's 34 characters, and that's including already spaces. So yeah, minimum 40 characters with spaces is something that I would aim for most of the time. But yeah, if we look at our violations, so areas where still the justification can be improved, there are still a few instances, but it's much less than what it was before. So it's a matter of refining these settings and working with the right font and adjusting your measure. That's going to help. So like here as well, if I were to increase the measure a little bit more, it would allow for less problems again in the text. And of course, once again, we could maybe make a little bit more space to the right as well if we wanted to. Since there's just so much space in this document, we could always increase that as well. I'm not going to spend more time on this spread because I think we talked about this enough now. But yeah, that's just something that I wanted to go through. Let me see, there's a question. A313 is asking, can you tell us tips to maximize negative space for magazines? Yeah, so this is almost like the opposite of the previous question from Roska. If you have too much copy and not enough pages, then you just won't have the luxury of using negative space. But if you have control over how much pages you can use in a magazine, and you basically get the copy and then you space things out, that's going to help you, that's going to allow you to have plenty of negative space, which is helping always the composition, the composition of your spreads. So for instance, if I go to another spread, let's just find another spread here. Here we have a huge negative space in the center of the page. That's again a massive luxury. So even with a double truck or run around, these are both terms used for images that run across the whole spread or both pages. Even though that we have an image there, I would still consider that central part a negative space because there's not much detail there. It's just more like textural detail of the rocks. But yeah, we have the luxury here to have that negative space. And then on this spread, for instance, we have a very good balance between the two sides. On the right side, we have a lot of text because of the body copy, and that image is also taking up quite a large amount of space, almost half of that page. So that the right side of the page feels quite heavy. So to contrast that, on the left side, on the left page, we have a large heading, but plenty of negative space or white space. So yeah, by the way, white space and negative space, a lot of people use it as a synonym, but there is a slight difference. Usually, I mean, you can use them as synonyms, but I like to refer to actual white space when it's completely white, while this here I would call negative space because there is an image there, but it's just no information. So we could place text on it if we wanted to, but right now it's intentionally kept as negative space. While this on the left side, I would call white space, because there's literally nothing there. So it's just the paper itself. So yeah, that's it depends on who you ask. Some people would say that they are exactly the same. I like to make that differentiation between the two, because I think there is still a difference between these two terms. All right, so let me see if we have any more time for examples. Let me jump to this other example here. Since we are doing a live stream, I always like to have a little bit of interactive part of the live stream, and I'm going to give you guys a bit of time to spot a few things that we could improve in this body copy here on the right side. So it's just a simple spread. I didn't even spend time on putting any effort into the left side of the page. I just put an image there. But what I want you to all focus on is the body copy here on the right. So we have a couple of things there already, an entry point, the drop cap. We have a rule between the two columns, we have space between the paragraphs, we have first line indents, and obviously the text is justified using hyphenation. But what can be used to improve this? What are the problems here? There's a few issues that we could improve. So let's see. I'm going to wait for some additional comments to come in. I can already see Cyprian is really fast. I'm going to give time for everyone else to spot these issues. And while we do that, I also just wanted to briefly mention that this live stream is sponsored by BenQ. So I'm just going to bring up my, let me just move this page to the right so you can still see it. And then while you are looking at that page on the right, I'm going to just show this is a video, by the way, whoever hasn't seen it yet, it's on our channel. We recently done this video. We put a lot of effort into it just to show our studio. Go check it out. You can find it, Creative Studio Tour, that's the name. This is my setup. Right now I'm sitting at this desk as well. And the main screen that I'm using connected to my iMac Pro is a BenQ PD3220U, which is an amazing monitor. I've been using this one and similar PD monitors from BenQ for at least 5 years now, maybe even more. Yeah, we have several of these actually in our studio. Our employees are using them, and there's just many things that I love about them. The color accuracy is great. There's a lot of control you have with the little remote control. You can adjust the color modes that you're using, but you can also see in this example, I am panning between the two screens. I'm showing how it synchronizes the color between the main monitor, in this case the iMac Pro, and the BenQ monitor itself. So it has a special syncing feature called MBook color mode whenever you use it together with a Mac computer, and it works perfectly well with MacBook Pros as well. I use it often with that, but even with an iMac Pro, as you can see it here, it's just almost exactly the same colors, and it's a pain if it's not. So I'm sure whoever is using multiple screens would know or attest to that can be a big problem. But enough of the screen. Let's jump back into the example, and I can see many recommendations here. So first, Cyprian said, space between the two columns of the text. Yes, for sure. If we have columns, and especially we have even a column rule added in between them, which by the way is within the text frame options. It's something you can turn on and off. Then you need to adjust. So whenever you use a column rule, you need to adjust the gutter or space between your columns, because visually you are adding an additional detail there that is taking up space, and it adds volume in your text frame. So what you need to do is go back into the general settings and increase the gutter. So at least in this case, I would use probably 12 millimeters, and already starting to feel better. Let me see the other suggestions. So I'm trying not to go ahead. I will just follow the recommendations. And then if there's anything missing at the end, I'm going to point out any additional changes. So I love this. This is going to be a nice collaborative refinement here. So I can see the next point was Ben. Ben was saying re-break to avoid widows and orphans. Brilliant point. So we have one of these lines, the last line of this paragraph, is separated from the rest of the paragraph. So if this happens, this is going to be I always have to double check. So the orphan is the first line. Yes. So widow is the last line. So I just call them orphans and widows, but this is the widow in this case. Widow must go alone. I think that's the easiest way to remember which one is which. So widow must go alone. It's in the next column on its own. While if we have something like this, let me just break this up into another paragraph, and I adjust it so there is an orphan there who is left behind alone, first line of the paragraph. So yeah, to fix orphans and widows, one of the quickest way to do is to have your paragraph, the whole text frame selected, and then go into the paragraph settings. So it's best to save this as a paragraph style. That's what normally I would do, but I think we can probably apply this here from the settings as well with the keep options, and just simply turn on keep lines together and I use the default setting, start 2 lines and end 2 lines. So the first 2 lines and the last 2 lines of paragraphs should never be separated. So that was once again in the additional settings for text. When you have your type tool selected, you will have these options here and choose keep options. And there, just simply turn this option on, and that is going to fix the orphans and widows for you. Let's move on to the next one. So baseline alignment, very good point as well from T00 Bad. That's something that we can also add here for sure. And for those who don't know what baseline alignment is, it's essentially something that you need to keep consistent throughout the whole document, ideally. Especially in documents like magazines and books, especially in books where the papers are usually thin and you would have a slight see-through or transparency between one page and the next on the other side of that same paper. So if you are not following baseline, it could actually lead to this confusing shift between the lines compared to one side of the page to the other. So yeah, you definitely want to avoid that. And the way you can set this up is by using the baseline feature, which you can find. There's a couple of different ways of turning this on, but I think probably the easiest way of doing it would be from the paragraph formatting controls, and then we just go into is it here as well in the text frame options? I think, yeah, probably this is the fastest way to get to it. So if I go in and turn on the custom baseline grid, now that is the custom one. That's not the one I want to use. I think it's this one here, right? That's the icon I was looking for. So the align to baseline grid icon is right here in the paragraph formatting controls. It's almost at the end of paragraph formatting. So once you select that, it's going to be quite crude at the beginning, but then if you Alt or Option click on the same icon, you can quickly get to the preferences for this. And this is throughout the whole document, but it also applies to everything within InDesign that you will do. So it's like a global preference that you can adjust. Here you can adjust the increments. So I can adjust that, and it's going to update only when we click OK. You can see it adjusted slightly after I made that change. But essentially, we can also turn on the view for this. So if I go into extras and choose show, should be here under grids, yes, show baseline grid, you can see this being visualized as well. So this is something that once you have in the settings turned on and your text frame has it enabled, that's important that this text frame be turned it on, right? Not that one, the where is it again? It looks so similar to the balance columns icon. It's this one, the align to baseline grid. So when it's turned on, it means that no matter where I move this text frame, it's always going to align the text to the baseline. And like we've seen it before, if I go back to the settings here, and just jump back to the settings, if I change the increment down even to less, like 8 points, it's going to give us a little bit more flexibility with our text. So it won't be restricted to create that big leading that we had originally or before when we turned it on the first time. But yeah, so baseline grid now makes sure that we have a much better alignment between the two sides of the text. But the one issue with reducing the increment is that when you are using space between paragraphs, you still might end up having this misaligned text. So in this case, this text here is not aligned to the lines on the left side. So in these cases, you have to be extra cautious how you set things up. And if I just go back a little bit before we made the baseline grid so low, the increment, I can see like here, for instance, even though we have a space between, it's still aligned to the left side. But then again, here we once again have that same issue. So these are things that you can refine with more effort. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but in general, the recommendation of using baseline grid, I 100% agree on, and it's something that is definitely worth using and learning about. Columns are not equal was another point. Actually, it was pointed out by Cyprian and also A313. This is something you can very quickly fix with the balance columns option, which I have up here. I'm just going to make sure that our text frame is big enough so we can see this. It's because of the baseline grid. So now if I just put this back here, if I turn off balance columns, I'm not sure why it's not showing it now. It's probably the, let's turn it off from here. Balance columns, yeah, there you go. So turning it off and turning it on. Oh yes, I see it's a toggle up here. I normally use it from the text frame options. So there's the unbalanced columns feature and then the balanced columns feature. I still like to tweak this manually after I use the feature, but generally it helps to balance all of your columns in the text frame. And then let's go to the next one. Vertical line not aligned at top with columns. I think that's definitely something we can fix here in the column rules. So what we want to do is the rule length. We want to increase the start point. So up there, if I go closer, I feel like we got it closer now. So that was also a good point. And at the end as well, we need to do the same. So I'm just going to zoom closer here, even maybe use a rule, or actually the baseline grid we can use to align it. So we go back column rules, and then at the end, we want to use a different amount. So I unlink it and then increase, or in this case, decrease it down. And maybe it can be even more specific, like 1.2 millimeters. If you work with a different measurement like picas, you might be able to get it set up easier like that. But that looks quite nice. Very good point again. Ben Harris is saying, yes, the hyphenation and justification is not refined here. I'm not going to go through that again because we already seen that in action, but that would 100% improve this a lot. Since we made changes here, I am just going to select the text and probably just reduce the text size a bit. That's going to already improve, like there will be less rivers within the text. And I would actually, that's probably a bit too much, maybe, yeah, 11 points or 10.5 would be a good size in this case. Will look better. And I'll just quickly do the optical margin alignment, which is also going to help. But yeah, that setting, if we spend time on that, refine it, it's going to improve it a lot. And then Cyprian saying that the line between the two columns of the text is not a must. No, it's not a must at all. It's probably would work. I mean, it's good to use it when there's a lot of additional things on the page, but when there's just text on its own like this, it's really not that important, especially when we have enough gutter that separates it already. But what I would say in this case is maybe we can make it a little bit less like thick, or in terms of visibility, I would just reduce the tint on it, maybe down to 40%. So it's much more subtle. It doesn't fight or compete with the text itself. And then maybe a little bit too much gap between the paragraphs now. Yeah, I agree. That's also something that we can fix. So we can just go back into the space between paragraphs and we can reduce it down to 2 millimeters. I feel like it's mainly the baseline grid that would need to be refined here to make sure that we don't have that much leading. The leading is quite intense now. I'm going to temporarily just turn that. Actually, if we turn it off, then a lot of things messes up now. So I'm not going to worry about that. Story setting for hyphenation. Yeah, we've already done that. And then there could be space or enter at the end. Could be space or enter at the end. I'm not sure what you mean, Cyprian, by that. Maybe it's not applicable anymore. I mean, I may have changed it since you commented that. But yeah, there are these minor, small refinements that you can do to improve the readability of your body copy that you should always pay attention to. And of course, you don't need to do this manually every time. What you want to do is to save these as paragraph styles. And I actually like to save commonly used paragraph styles into my Creative Cloud libraries. So for instance, let's just say this is something that I want to reuse in another document, the settings that we have here. You have two options that you can do to turn this into like a template. One is that you go into your paragraph styles panel and Alt or Option click on Create New Style. So when you do that, Alt or Option click on that. At the bottom, you will find the Add to CC Library option. I'm just going to call this one Body Copy Template. You can always keep an eye on what you save as a style. And of course, I would want to apply this style to this selection as well. So there we have it in our CC library. This is our template that we created. And if I go to another document, select a paragraph, I can very quickly apply the same settings there. So that's like a universal way of using a style. And the good thing about a paragraph style or character style saved in CC libraries is that once you apply it in a new document, it immediately puts it into the document itself. So even if you delete the style from your libraries, CC libraries, it will still stay in all of the documents wherever you used it. Okay, so that's one of the ways that you can do the reusing something. But if you want to reuse a whole setup, like even including the way the first paragraph is handled, which is in this case the drop cap, and other aspects like the rule in between the two columns, then you can also save this as a snippet. What you do is go to File menu and then you choose Export. So having that frame selected, and then you choose the InDesign snippet option. This is something that we can again call body copy frame. All right, let's save it in there. And then if we jump into another document, let's just go to the next page. And then when I do paste, that's Command or Control D, we can find that same file, body copy frame, open, click, and there you go. It already brought it in. The only thing that wasn't carried over, it seems, is the style of this character, which I'm not 100% sure why. But the rest of the formatting seems to be working really well. I think there might have been a missing style already in the previous document, which restricted that. But yeah, besides that, you can see it's the same exact thing. So yeah, the InDesign snippet is another useful feature there. But that is pretty much all we had time for today. So 1.5 hours is usually what I try to keep these live streams to. Any questions about anything that we covered so far, let me know. I will try to respond to. And while I wait for that this response, I'm just going to show one final quick technique, and that is fixing. That's nobody mentioned this, but this is also something that can be fixed here. Whenever you have a single word at the end of a paragraph, we normally refer to that as a runt, and that's something that doesn't look that pleasing. I like to have at least 10 characters, maybe 15 characters at the end of every last line. Otherwise, it just breaks the continuity of the text too much. I mean, it's good to have short last lines of paragraphs, especially when you have justification, because you want to have a bit of interruption, but not too much. Like this one here is an ideal interruption. These two are not ideal interruptions. They are too small. These are the ones that I would call a runt. So for this, to eliminate these, you have to do two things. First, you need to save a new character style, which is going to be a simple change. Just simply set the option on the basic character formats to no break. So I'll type this in, just call it no break, but most importantly, you have to check that option. And then I'm going to apply this to the whole, I'm not going to apply it to the whole text. We will apply it to the paragraph style that we've used in this text. So I'm going to select all of this, choose body copy template. I'm actually just going to set it to these two last these two paragraphs. So I will save it. Yeah, these are already using body copy template anyway. So if I go into double click on body copy template paragraph style, or right click edit that, we just need to go into the grab style option, choose new grab style, and then you want to apply the character style which we created, no break, with the following code. It's full stop, curly bracket, the number of the minimum amount of characters you want to see in the last line of your paragraphs. I typed in 15, curly brackets closed, and then a $sign. That $sign means it's at the end of the paragraph and where it's going to be applied. So as long as you use that setting, you see already improved our text. So this was before and this is after. It's a simple little neat trick with the combination of a character style and the paragraph style to eliminate the runts. Another nice tweak there. And if I go back to this code that I have here, if I type in 20 and click away somewhere, you can see we could even increase that last line further if we wanted to. So you are just specifying the minimum amount of characters in your last lines. And I'm going to click OK, zoom back a bit, and then let me just have a quick look at the comments before we wrap up. Fierce Panda is saying you never use hyphenation. It's up to the designer. Well, yeah, most of the time up to you. If you work in an like in-house in a publisher, they might have the preferences for whether they want to use it or not, or even between different magazines they might have different preferences. But most of the time, I would not use justification without hyphenation. It's just too hard to refine justify text without allowing hyphenation. So as long as you use only left or right align, then I see no issue with not using hyphens. But if you are working with justified text, then I mean you can probably still make the text work, but you would have issues not using hyphenation there, or it would be a struggle to get it right without hyphenation. But yeah, I mean it's really up to the designer, like you said. And then that's probably it. Cool. All right, well, thank you so much, guys and girls, everyone who joined today. Also for those who are watching the recorded version, I hope you will find this stream useful. We will be doing more streams this year, probably every 2 weeks. There will be a stream coming, so keep an eye out. We always try to put it up a few days before the stream starts, so you will have time to get notified, or like have enough have enough time to plan your days if you want to attend live. I love to see you guys attending live because it really makes a difference. It's great that we can, it feels like we are working together. We go back and forth and make like changes to the examples that I have together, not just me on my own. And yeah, so once again, thanks a lot for everyone who joined live, and for those who are watching the recording as well. Hopefully you can make it to the next one. And then also just thanks to BenQ for sponsoring these live streams. And by the way, we will have most likely a video coming out later this week, which we've been working on for several weeks now. It's a very exciting video. I'm not going to tell you what it is about, but make sure you keep an eye out for that. It's been a very exciting video we worked on for a long time, and hope you will like it. So keep an eye out for that too. And thank you so much, and see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.